Rise. Circuit Court of the Ninth Judicial Circuit in and for Orange County, Florida is now open. The Honorable Calvin Perry, Jr., Chief Judge presiding.
You may be seated. Okay, let the record reflect that the defendant is present, along with counsel for the defendant, Assistant State Attorney. I was incorporating the changes that Ms. Vickers had emailed. So let's go through these, and then we will get to those changes. Give you a little time to go through them, and then we'll go through them one by one. let's go to the issue of multiple victims, the issue that Mrs. Klausner raised. Wanted me to read the instruction 5 different times. What I've done to cure that problem that she think may exist is the instruction I give as an introduction to that, and then the catch-all instruction at the end. First of all, does the state have any objections to the multiple victim instruction?
Yes, sir.
Does the defense?
No.
Okay. The next instruction that there's a bone of contention on, and then we'll go back and see if you have any others, is dealing with insanity. Now, there's one thing I noticed. The defense has requested, based upon the Wallace case and the Cruz case, that they be told that there are 2 ways, and that there are in fact 2 ways. So what I propose to do is to strike the original insanity instruction, and there's one thing that you're going to need to do. It says an issue in this case is whether Jason Rodriguez was insane when the crime was committed. There are 2 ways in which a person can be found insane. The first is known as insanity. The second is known as insanity hallucinations. You are to consider insanity hallucinations if you find the defendant sane under the insanity instruction below. And cutting and pasting a few minutes ago, I noticed that the latter portion of the insanity instruction that deals with the following: if your verdict is that the defendant is not guilty by reason of insanity, that does not necessarily mean he will be released from custody. I must conduct further proceedings. And the 2 subsequent paragraph talks about psychotropic medications. If you take that page from your first set of instructions that I gave you yesterday and add it after that, then that instruction will be complete. Then we go to the insanity hallucinations, which basically follows Cruz in the old standard, except I took out the language that was not applicable because of the law dealing with the burden shifting. Now, any objections to the instructions other than the ones you previously lodged?
No.
If you run across anything, you'll have one more opportunity for corrections because we're going to take a break before I instruct them. But I wanted to get these in your hands. Ms. Vickers, any objections to the verdict forms and special verdict forms on behalf of your client?
No.
Okay. How much time is the state requesting?
90 minutes total, Your Honor.
How long?
90 minutes total.
Okay, and how much time is the defense requesting?
90 minutes, but I don't think it'll take that long. Your Honor, the defense would also request a rebuttal closing based on Preston versus State 260 Southern 2nd 501, which talks about the reason that the state does get a rebuttal is because they have a burden of proof. At this point, the defense does have a burden to prove, and we would ask for a rebuttal as such. case law that may approach.
State?
Your Honor, there's no mechanism in the Florida Rules of Criminal Procedure currently to allow the defense to have rebuttal closing under any circumstances.
The case of Preston versus State was decided by the Florida Supreme Court in 1972. The law dealing with closing argument was changed by the Rules of Criminal Procedure several years ago. So based upon the current state of the law, i.e. the Rules of Criminal Procedure, your request for a rebuttal closing argument will be denied. All right. Anything else, folks?
The state does have its written request for special jury instructions by approach.
You may.
I provided a copy to counsel. I'm also providing the court a copy of the verdict forms and special findings, which are also been provided to counsel.
The state special requested instruction dealing with hallucinations and delusions is incorporated in, I believe, the instruction that I will be giving now, so that will be denied. Let me ask the question about your second instruction, which reads as follows. A person is justified in using deadly force if he reasonably believes that such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself or another. What is the necessity for that instruction?
Your Honor, during argument about whether or not the delusions or hallucinations justify the defendant's acts, we'll be referring to testimony of the expert witnesses that has indicated that because of his hallucinations and or delusions, Mr. Rodriguez believed it was necessary to act in self-defense because of the nature of the delusion. Therefore, we believe that the jury needs to be instructed on the self-defense law, since it's going to be referenced in the closing argument and because it was referenced during testimony.
And what would that do in aiding the jury, particularly if they believe, one, that he's insane?
Because if they believe that, in evaluating the evidence, they have to consider whether or not the testimony given by the experts is credible, in that the reason why he does not understand the difference between right and wrong is because of his delusions. His delusions are that he is protecting himself or his family from some sort of harm. That was the testimony that came out. So since they are talking about him acting in self-defense as part of the delusion to support the insanity argument, the jury should hear what the law of self-defense is.
And upon hearing that, what do you hope to achieve?
I'm not understanding that.
Well, you were saying that they need to know the law of self-defense, but he's not raising self-defense as a defense in this case. His defense is the affirmative defense of insanity.
His insanity defense incorporates self-defense.
But whether or not his thought process on self-defense was correct or incorrect, the issue I'm having a problem with is if he was insane, it makes no difference because he's not dealing with reality anyway.
That's part one.
Okay.
When you get to part two, talking about hallucinations and delusions, which is what we will be asking the jury to do, what it says is if you presume his delusions to be true, were his actions lawful? And since the argument in connection with that is that his actions were in self-defense, because his delusion was his life was being threatened, that then incorporates a delusional self-defense claim.
Assume for the moment, with your argument, that they find that he was delusional, but they also find that he did not act in self-defense, and they also find that he was insane. Does that give them the implication that since he was not acting in self-defense despite his insanity, that he should be found guilty?
They're two separate concepts.
Go on.
If they get to the point where they believe that he understood the difference between right and wrong, but that he was suffering from hallucinations and delusions, which is the second instruction, then they will be instructed that presuming that the hallucinations are true, they have to act in making this evaluation as if the hallucinations were true. Does that justify the act or the violence in this case? And the only way it justifies it is if he, as his witnesses testify, acted in self-defense because he felt that his person or the persons of others was being threatened in the context of his delusion.
Reply from the defense.
Your Honor, forcing the defense to prove self-defense is violation of due process. We filed our notice of insanity based on paranoid schizophrenia. We did not ask for the hallucination instruction. We do not want the hallucination instruction. It is being forced upon us. With that, it's also presumably going to be forced upon us to now prove self-defense. If you go back to this, they first have to believe that he was sane. There has been no rebutting the doctors to the fact that he had a mental disease, and number two, that he didn't know what he was doing was wrong. So no rebuttal on that fact. So first of all, they have to get to the second instruction. To force us to prove self-defense, which is not the theory of defense that we raised. We did not raise an affirmative defense of self-defense. Is due process. It forces burden shifting to us that we didn't raise. We're not asking for it.
Okay. The state's requested instruction dealing with self-defense will be denied at this time. Subject to being renewed based upon the arguments that happened during closing. Anything else?
No.
All right, let's return to jury.
Your Honor, permission to move freely about the courtroom during closings?
You may.
Thank you.
jury entered.
Move that for a second. You may be seated. Thank you. Stay recognized, President of the jury. And does the defense.
Yes, Your Honor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Did you follow all of my previous instructions? Both the state and the defense have now rested their case. The attorneys now will present their final arguments. Please remember that what the attorneys say is not evidence or your instruction on the law. However, do listen closely to their arguments. They are intended to aid you in understanding the case. Each side will have equal time, but the state is entitled to divide this time between an opening argument and a rebuttal argument after the defense has spoken.
As you've heard them. You know the facts, ladies and gentlemen, because you've heard from the witnesses in this case. You heard from John Harrison. You heard from Ms. Harrison as she explained and relived the moments of November 6, 2009, just before noon, at the Gateway Center, just down the street. You heard the facts that are consistent among all of the witnesses who were in the building that day. Lynette Severino, John Hornbeck, the other victims in the case, all testified the same. Farrell Hickson told you what happened that day. They told you that a man, that some of them knew, Jason Rodriguez, came into the building and didn't shoot wildly, didn't spray bullets, targeted people and shot them 2 at a time. Pop, pop. You did not hear from Otis Beckles because he did not speak. You also, ladies and gentlemen, heard the description of Jason Rodriguez's face when you walked through that office. Farrell Hickson told you, and Severino told you he was angry. And that is consistent with the other facts that you've heard. Ladies and gentlemen, you've also heard opinion in this case. You've heard the opinion of doctors. Opinions that the evidence has come out are sloppy, incomplete, and are attempting to convince you, clear and convincing evidence, the defense's burden on insanity in this case. And they cannot do so, based on facts. They're incomplete because they didn't consider the facts that you have heard. You are now in a better position than those experts were to render opinion and ultimately decision in this case because you have heard the facts. So for the next few minutes, I'd like to spend the time talking about the specific facts you've heard in the context of the law. The state in this case has charged 1 count of first-degree murder and 5 counts of attempted first-degree murder. The issue in this case, I would submit to you, is premeditation. You're going to get instructions from the judge. He's going to give them to you after he reads them to you. And he's going to tell you that to prove the crime of first-degree murder, the state has to prove that the victim, Otis Beckford, is dead. And there's been a stipulation read to you that that is in fact the case, and it's also the testimony here. The state has to prove that his death was caused by the criminal act of Jason Rodriguez. I don't think there's been any dispute that Jason Rodriguez had the firearm and shot him that day. I also would point out the state has to prove that there was a premeditated killing of Otis Beckford. And the judge is going to instruct you what premeditation is. And it's at this point that I ask you to set aside what you think you may know from TV or movies about what premeditation means. It doesn't require a big plan as we see on television. He's going to tell you that it's a conscious decision to kill. It requires reflection. It must exist before the actual killing. There is no set amount of time for premeditation, as long as the person has a conscious intent and the opportunity to reflect on the consequences. And the testimony in this case is that Jason Rodriguez had plenty of time, the morning of November 6th, the time he woke up, to reflect on the moments right before he shot Otis Beckford, and then proceeded through the office and shot Ed Severino, John Hornbeck, John Harrison, Guy Lujanville, and Farrell Casey. So that's premeditation. But the state, it's the state's burden to prove each and every element of those crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. You're also going to get lesser included offenses. You're going to be instructed that there are some lesser included offenses you can consider: second-degree murder, manslaughter. The state does not believe they're applicable. They're an option for you if you find it was not premeditation. The difference between first-degree murder and second-degree murder is first-degree murder requires premeditation, second does not. I'm not going to talk about those much because we don't believe they're applicable based on the facts that you've heard. So, what is the evidence of premeditation in this case? The evidence of premeditation in this case shows not only that he had a conscious intent to kill, but it also shows that Jason Rodriguez that morning knew what he was doing was wrong, contrary to the opinion of the doctors, who ignored the facts we're about to review. We know, ladies and gentlemen, based on the testimony and evidence, that the anger that Jason Rodriguez had with RS&H began on June 13th of 2007, the day he was terminated from poor performance. We know that because of what he did afterwards. He shook hands with Renato Gonzalez, walked to get his materials off his computer and couldn't get in. So recall what the IT manager, Kenneth Van Valzen, told you happened when he went and tried to help Jason Rodriguez. He essentially told him where he could go, indicating he was angry from the very beginning. We also know that Jason Rodriguez was angry because of the statements of Anna Rodriguez. Now, like you recall, when she testified in this case, and I asked her on cross-examination, did he ever talk to her about his job with you? Did he ever talk about his employment, why he left, where he worked? What was her answer? No. 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 Yet on the day he was arrested, and Sergeant Ahern had contact with her, she told him this is all because he was treated unfairly. And I made it clear with Ms. Rodriguez. Did you talk to employers? Did you talk to his boss? You were doing paperwork, making sure no one else could have told her about that anger, about that being treated unfairly, that perception. And she made it clear that that was the case. That's how you know that he told his mother he was treated unfairly. and that the anger began that day. The other reason you know, ladies and gentlemen, that he was angry starting June 13th of 2007 is because when he left the office, Jesse Force, the manager at the time, he put a note on his door and made a telling sign. Pointed his finger at the window and pulled the proverbial trigger. No one knowing that 2 years later, that is exactly what would happen. Evidence of premeditation, and that he knew exactly what he was doing that day. And he knew it was wrong. I would also ask you to recall June 13th because of who was in the meeting that day. Who was in the termination meeting? Jim Adderable and Renato Gonzalez. And it's at this point that I ask you to recall the path that he took through the office. And where that path took him. By the office, in the corner of Renato Gonzalez, the man in the meeting that terminated. Up the hallway along the wall, past Jim Adderable's office in the corner. Jesse Force right next door. Past James Beverly, who good fortune would have, had moved to the interior office. Those were the people who were present when he was terminated. And those were the people he went back to look for on November 6th of 2009, according to the facts. I would also ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to consider the fact of the context of Jason Rodriguez's life in November of 2009. He had lost his job, multiple jobs. A man with an engineering degree was working at a fast food restaurant. Then he was unemployed and living with his mother at 40 years old. Those are not happy times. That naturally creates frustration. The context of what was in his life that day is evidence of premeditation, anger, and that he knew it was wrong. So now, let's go to the actual day of the murder. November 6, 2009. Start by talking about what he was doing that morning. Because there's been testimony that at that time, his mother says he wouldn't go out of the house, he was staring blankly, he was shoving matchsticks in places. But what was he doing the morning of November 6, 2009? He was running errands. Jason Rodriguez was running errands. Specific errands. He was going to enroll in school. That is the mindset of a person trying to get their life back together. Going to go back to school to get his master's. That's been the testimony. Not the mindset of a shut-in who does not know what is going on in the world around him. So, that morning, he gets dressed. You see him on video. Clothes fit appropriately. Gets in his mother's car and leaves. Goes to the post office. Goes to Ana Mendez University. Tries to enroll. Doesn't have tuition money. Owes it back. So now, Jason Rodriguez knows he needs money to get his life back started. Immediate thought, I have to go to the post office. My employment check should be there. So we should actually take a step back. Because that morning when he left the office, when he left his house, his apartment with his mother, he had something with him. He had a firearm. And not just a firearm, he had multiple magazines. And in those magazines were multiple cartridges and rounds. And we know that because when he went into the post office, and just before that to school, he knew not to take the firearm inside. Getting his life back together, attempting to, and knew that morning it was unlawful to take the gun into the building. So he didn't. Now mind you, we've been told that he was in constant fear. Fear was everywhere, all around him. Yet he felt comfortable to put the firearm away and go into two public places within the span of a few hours. Those are facts that you have heard. So he goes into the school after having put his firearm away, comes back out of the school, puts his firearm back, goes to the post office, leaves it away, goes inside, no unemployment check. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the anger kicks in. Now the memories of Jim Abiteboul, and Renato Gonzalez, and his old superior, James Beverly, they come flooding back. And we know that because that is where he went. There's testimony that he dropped the mail and drove straight there. Didn't drive to the Orange County Expressway, the Turnpike, anywhere else. He drove to RS&H. What else do we know from the testimony and evidence in this case? We know that as he drove the silver Hyundai belonging to his mother that day, at some point, he took the firearm out again. He had removed it, picked it back up to enter the Gateway Center. We know that he intended to kill people that day because he didn't take unemployment papers. Because recall what he said. I wanted to talk about the numbers. I wanted to make sure they were fixed. He had envelopes. He had paperwork. He didn't carry any unemployment paperwork in with him that day. You've seen the video. There's no papers in his hand. There's no documentation. And you know, when he got to the top, the 8th floor, there was no conversation either. What we know is that he took a loaded 9mm high-point firearm into the Gateway Center after having set it aside. That is a fact. So then what? What does he do? He's conscious enough to remember that he can't park in structured parking anymore because he's not an employee, so he parks on the street. You've seen the video where Jason Rodriguez walks past the gate into the entrance of the parking garage and smacks it angrily. You've seen the video as he walks through and does not go in the front door of the Gateway Center. Another conscious decision that he made that day, a fact. Instead, he goes to the elevators that lead up to the parking garage. You know from testimony from Kenneth Van Velzen and several others that you can enter the back staircase to the building, the offices of RS&H, through the parking garage. You know testimony from Lori Ross that she saw the defendant at near in the time of the shooting between the 5th and 6th floors of the parking garage. Not running frantically, not looking confused, intently staring at her. And we know that moments later, James Pearson passes the defendant as he goes to see where he is, and Jason Rodriguez goes to commit the murder and attempted murders that he does. You see him get on the elevator, you see him get off the elevator. And of course, you can watch the videos, review any of the evidence you like as you deliberate. There's no peeking around corners, signs of paranoia that have been described. It is a conscious, deliberate walk and choice. Choices made throughout the morning. So then he comes down the elevator, and what does he do? Does he go around through the front of the building? No. He cuts through the side entrance that goes along the side of the building. Less visible. And then he walks into the Gateway Center. All along, the firearm concealed under his shirt, in his hip. Those are the facts that you have heard. Not speculation, not opinion, but facts. Then we come to the facts that the doctors and professors chose not to rely upon, not even to review in many instances. Jason Rodriguez gets off the elevator. He walks to the left RS&H door, number 2, and opens it according to Maureen Daly with force. Recall her testimony that he doesn't walk towards her, he walks straight ahead where the bushes are towards the left entrance to the office, because he's determined and he knows where he's going. Then he catches a glimpse of Maureen Daly and Otis Becker. He stops, according to Maureen Daly, pulls his shirt up, and with his left hand reaches for his firearm. Pulls the firearm up, points it at her, and Otis Beckford, 26-year-old engineer, moved. And in that moment, Jason Rodriguez had time to reflect and make a conscious decision to shoot not just anyone, but the man whose work was compared to his. Because recall, James Beverly told you that he worked with Otis Beckford. And that there were meetings, at least one meeting, where Mr. Beverly held out young Otis Beckford as an example for the work he should be turning in. I would submit to you that that thought went through Jason Rodriguez's mind. And then he pointed the 9mm at him, and he fired the first shot that day. And that shot went in underneath Mr. Beckford's arm, punctured his lungs, and killed him. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, that was just the beginning. The shots continued. Maureen Daly told you that though she was cowering and praying, the pops kept coming. Jason Rodriguez, firearm now in hand, is walking. He walks to the left, and he enters the main hallway. He doesn't walk towards the back of the office directly where Rafael Velasquez is, who he used to sit next to. He takes a very determined path, according to all of the witnesses. This is where he went. He takes an immediate right towards the office of Renato Gonzalez, which at this point and on this day is dark because he started to work in the land. As he turns, Jason Rodriguez looks up and he sees Ed Severino, whose crime that day was going to make copies of PDFs for his wife. Ed Severino is walking down the hall. He looks up and he sees the angry face of Jason Rodriguez. And Jason Rodriguez pulls 2 hands up, points the firearm at him, and fires a shot. Thankfully, missing just to the left and hitting Ed Severino in his right arm. Ed Severino then acts as the warning for everyone else in the building that day, because multiple witnesses said that they saw Ed running with a look of terror on his face. Ed runs around, Mr. Severino comes all the way through, all the way out the back, and down the elevator. So all this time, Jason Rodriguez is starting to walk through the Gateway Center. He's starting to walk through Suite 800 of RS&H. In the back, Farrell Hickson and Jeffrey Glenn hear a pop. People are starting to think it's a joke, it's firecrackers. But it's not a joke, because Jason Rodriguez has now fired more than one conscious, intentional shot. He looks at Renato Gonzalez's office and he keeps going. And out of the corner of his eye, he sees John Hornbeck exit the office. He turns the corner, and as he turns the corner, he runs, he's shot in the shoulder. Because Jason Rodriguez saw him move, raise the firearm, and fire, hitting him in the torso, aiming to kill. Guy Lugerville is still in his office on the interior, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to make a decision. Because Keith Brockman had run out that way, knowing, because he could see what the terror was. Right about this time, Keandra Harrison stands up, right across from Nicole Jeffers. Keandra Harrison gets shot in the ankle as Ed Severino is running towards her. They collide, she falls. She crawls in what used to be James Beverly's cubicle. And at that point, Jason Rodriguez walks over, and according to her, and the physical evidence that she told you about the shots, stands over her and puts a shot into her chest. Senator Harrison begins to pray. Jason Rodriguez is still walking. He's walking towards the interior of the office. He's walking towards Jim Averable's office. Jim Averable was not there that day. Jesse Forrest was not there that day, so he walks past. As he's walking past, he's approaching the interior. He walks past Nicole Jeffers, who's hiding in her cubicle, hearing the shots go off. He walks past them, gets to the table, right outside the cubicle that belongs to Elizabeth Bartell. And you've heard the testimony about how many shots he fired from this point. You've seen the cartridge casings on the floor. Because at that point, Guy Lujanville gets the courage to run out of his office. He doesn't know what to do, so he runs. He gets up his courage and he takes off towards the reception area. And he's shot in the back. He's shot in the back because once again, Jason Rodriguez raises the firearm and makes the decision to point and try to end his life. Because Guy Lujanville worked for RSH. Because he didn't get his employment check. Because he couldn't register for school. These are facts that you have heard. Facts not considered by people rendering opinions. At this point, Guy Lujanville is on the far side. He sees Jason Rodriguez and they make eye contact. We know that at this point, based on the number of shots fired and the noises that Elizabeth Bartell heard from her cubicle, that he reloads. Jason Rodriguez, think about the action. He has to go into his pocket or into his vest, wherever it may be, and get another magazine because he's run out of shots to fire. He trades it off. He doesn't just trade it off, he puts it somewhere on his person because it wasn't recovered at the RSH building to take it with him. He loads the second magazine in the clip, chambers around, and he continues to walk down the hall. Who's he walking towards? He's walking towards Jeff Glenn and Farrell Hickson because Mr. Glenn at this point knows there's a problem. And Mr. Glenn told you that he made the decision that he couldn't get him and Farrell Hickson out, so they stayed in the office. Walking with pace, firing, 2 at a time. Pop, pop. Cole Jeffers told you. Shots in cubicles. Walking down the hall, purposely. Walking along the hallway where his managers worked. The people responsible for his firing. And of course we forgot one. James Beverly. Because James Beverly's cubicle used to be right there where Amy Betts was. The cubicle where you saw the shoes that belonged to Keandre Harrison. James Beverly was standing across the hall and looked straight through the gap in the cubicles. And he saw Jason Rodriguez with a firearm in his hand. And he knew he was there for him. He looks into the cubicle for James Beverly. James Beverly was not there. And Mr. Beverly is able to escape unharmed. So now, Mr. Hickson and Mr. Glenn are attempting to barricade themselves in the office. Farrell Hickson is trying to find a place to hide. Jeff Glenn is jammed up against the door. Another indication of premeditation and that he knew exactly what he was doing and that it was wrong. He tries to get in the door. He is not. Jason Rodriguez is not randomly shooting at anything that moves. He is searching. He is searching for people to kill. And we know that because he tries the door. He tries to get into the office. He tries it the first time. And Mr. Glenn is able to keep it shut. And this time, fortunately, Jason Rodriguez walks past the window and Farrell Hickson is safe. He walks down the hall and according to the forensic evidence in the case is still firing. Pop! Pop! Firing people exiting out the back. He walks all the way down the hall, according to the shell casings. And this is significant because Jason Rodriguez's office was on that hallway, right next to Rafael Velasquez, who was unharmed. The source of the conspiracy is unharmed. And the reason he is unharmed, ladies and gentlemen, is because Jason Rodriguez was not there to end a conspiracy. He was there because he was angry. He was angry at the state of his life, and he was going to take it out on the person he held responsible. So he keeps walking. He walks right past Rafael Velasquez's office, his old office, and then he stops. And he makes another decision that shows his premeditation and conscious thought, and that he knew it was wrong. And he was there for the managers. Because he doesn't go out the back exit. He doesn't go out the easy way from where he was in the building, the way that he could have taken as an employee over and over again. He doubles back. He doubles back. Because he hasn't found who he's looking for. Now he's been past the manager's offices and he's gone all the way down. And Jason Rodriguez, according to the evidence, thinks to himself, maybe I missed. Maybe they're hiding. So he goes back on his hunt. He turns around and he gets to the window. And yet again he tries the door. Again, Jeffrey Glenn is able to keep it shut. But this time, Jason Rodriguez is going to find out who's preventing him from getting in. He steps back from the window and sees Farrell Hickson. Farrell Hickson told you that he points with two arms towards his torso and fires. And the bullet goes through the window and ends up hitting him in the leg. Farrell Hickson screams out, and Elizabeth Bartell, still in her cubicle, cowering in fear, hears him scream. Then Jeffrey Glenn hears him walking away. Here's Jason Rodriguez walking away down the hallway. He hears the crunch of glass. And now Elizabeth Bartell and Nicole Jeffers can hear him returning. Coming back to go right along the same wall. Because, ladies and gentlemen, from right here in this office, the most direct route out is down the inner hallway. But he does not go that way. Jason Rodriguez was there to kill the managers that morning. The people who fired him. So he went back to their offices. And he checked them one by one. And we know that because Keandra Harrison, while he was at the other side of the office, had hobbled her way into Renato Gonzalez's office. She was cowering in the corner by the window. She had blood on the table, on the chair, and she's waiting. And she sees out underneath the desk the feet of Jason Rodriguez. And according to her, he stands there for a full minute looking. Now, it was probably less than a minute. It probably felt like a lifetime. The point is that he went back to the manager who was in the meeting where he was fired. And he looked. The office was dark, and Keandra Harrison was safe. Jason Rodriguez then walks out the front doors of RSNH, past the body of 26-year-old Rose Beck. Maureen Daly, by this time, had sought shelter in the construction services wing of the building. He exits as quietly as he entered. He takes the elevator casually downstairs, walks out the front door, and people fortunate enough to escape downstairs run away as they see him come back to get into the silver Hyundai and drive home. Those, ladies and gentlemen, are the facts that you heard from 12 witnesses called by the state. All saying and verifying the same thing. That Jason Rodriguez, on the morning of November 6, 2009, acted with purpose and intent with a mindset that he knew what he was doing. But it did not stop there. Of course, Jason Rodriguez gets back in his car. And we know that he's wearing a vest in the video. And we know that he has the magazines in his firearm. When he's found, of course, and this was conceded by Dr. Pritchard, the magazine's gone. So it's easy to say, well, he could have just thrown the gun. It's more purposeful to get rid of the magazines. You drive him down the road, you toss the gun. To unload the magazines, think about the acts. Because these are conscious choices and decisions. He has to unload the magazine from the firearm and toss it. Pull the other magazine out of the vest or pants pocket and toss it. and he's driving, maybe getting gas on the way home, and he pulls into his apartment where his mother is waiting. From everything we know, it's really unknown about the horror that just occurred. Then, of course, the Orlando Police Department investigates. They find out where he is. They go to him. And Jason Rodriguez makes yet another motion or takes another act, establishes another fact that he knew exactly what he had done was wrong. Hands up. He tells SWAT officers as he's leaving, just going through a bad time. And he was. It was a bad time. And he's sorry. A few minutes later, when he's at the Orlando Police Department, being walked in, a very specific question about a very specific act is asked. Why did you do it? His response is, they left me to rot. They is not some vague reference. It's the people he had just taken his vengeance out on. Why did you do it? The it was the shooting that he just committed. The they is the people that he held responsible. Not some amorphous conspiracy. Those facts, ladies and gentlemen, all of them together, leave no doubt, just as the state said in this opening, not a reasonable doubt, no doubt, that Jason Rodriguez committed first-degree murder and 5 counts of attempted first-degree murder on the morning of November 6, 2009. He used a firearm, the high point 9mm that is in evidence. And I say that because you're going to be asked to make special findings that a firearm was involved. We ask that you do that, because that's the evidence and testimony in this case. Those are the facts. And now, for a very brief amount of time, I want to talk about the opinions. The beliefs, not necessarily based on fact or knowledge. And specifically, I want to talk to you about why they were sloppy, why they were incomplete, and why they demonstrate a very natural bias. Ladies and gentlemen, we know they were sloppy because expert after expert told you about the things they hadn't done, the things they hadn't reviewed, the things they did not know about that morning. Professor Otto was the first person to tell you, after reaching an opinion, that he watched the video. Several witnesses, several of the experts said something very similar. Well, after I reached my opinion, I reviewed this. And after I reached my opinion, I did that. So let's think about that fact. They were asked to render an opinion on a very important issue where people are dead. A person is dead. And they didn't take the time to review all the statements. That's what you heard. These professionals didn't take the time to read it. And if they did read it, they read it afterwards. Now, of course, it was cleaned up a little bit. Well, we read the summary. We read the Orlando Police Department summary, and it was complete and accurate. Of course, because we're doctors. And Dr. Danziger had a very big binder, stacked full of stuff that he showed you. This is the supplement, 26 pages. These are the statements they didn't read. Elizabeth Bartell, James Beverly, Keith Brockman, Maureen Daly, read afterwards by some, Renato Gonzalez, Keandra Harrison, Pharaoh Hickson, Guy Lujanville, James Pearson, the security guard, Edward Severino, John Hornbeck, and Nicole Jeffers. Didn't read it. Did not read it. is sloppy. And it indicates that they reached their opinion before they had all the facts. It indicates that they reached their opinion before wanting to consider all the facts. And we'll get to the professional bias in a moment. I would submit to you that not only is it an opinion, but it's an opinion that is based on insufficient facts. They did not know the victims' names. They did not know the path of travel that he took, that Jason Rodriguez took, and what it showed. They didn't know where the manager's offices were located because they took his word for it and the word of his mother. So, what did they do? Because, ladies and gentlemen, sanity is an issue at the time of the offense. That's what you're going to be told. It's the mental state at the time of the offense. Not in 2007, not in 2008, at the time of the offense. The morning this occurred and the moment that he walked into the building at RSMH, or the suite at RSMH. So, the doctors had to fill in the gaps. Dr. Pritchard was very clear about this point. There was a gap, 3 to 4 months, where there was no information. So who did he turn to? The defendant's mother. I would submit to you that the testimony that came out is not credible. Because she told you, admitted, that she had taken him to the doctor, was aware of his psychiatric problems, had in fact had him Baker acted, written a statement to have his firearms taken away. I asked her, did you think it was serious? Yes. House on fire, serious? Yes. His mental state? Yes. Yet, when she says she makes all these observations in those 5 days, when she makes all those observations, allegedly, on the morning of November 6th, she never calls a soul. Doesn't call the defendant's brother. Doesn't call the police. Doesn't call the doctor. Doesn't call a friend, pastor, or anyone else she said she was going to call. She didn't call because it didn't happen. It did not happen. She gave that statement to those doctors 3 years later. 3 years. It is not credible. And that is what these doctors based their opinion on at the time of the offense. It is understandable, and don't get me wrong, that a mother's love will lead them or her to say statements. It is understandable, but it's not permissible, and it's not for you to consider, I would argue to you, in your verdict, and when you consider the opinions of the doctors. Not only did she not call anyone, she told Dr. Olander that she made all these observations about the car on the ride home. She told the other doctors. She told Dr. Olander that his cousin picked her up from the airport. And of course, she said she had no idea where he worked or how he was employed or terminated or how he felt, but that's not what she told Sergeant Ahern. We know they were sloppy. They were also incomplete. We know that because the doctors went back. Some of them, after the trial started, went back. Why go back if you have everything you need? Because they didn't. And they rendered opinions that were incomplete and then tried to go back and fix it. But of course they can't because you know that. And it came out. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I would argue to you that their opinions cannot be trusted because there's bias. And this is not necessarily something that the doctors think about, but all of them testified over and over again that this is what they do. They evaluate people, and they render their opinion over and over. Some of them said it's 70% of their practice. And when you're always looking for one thing, is it really a surprise when you find it? It's like a story. There's a drunk guy walking home from a bar, and the cop's driving down the road, and he sees him, and the drunk man is standing underneath a long road, underneath the spotlight. And he looks down, and the cop sees him. What are you looking for? My keys. Why are you looking here? Is this is where the light is? The doctor's professional experience tells them to look for insanity, so they find it. They find it without even looking at the facts. The last thing I'll say about the expert testimony in this case is I'll ask you to put it to the test. Because Dr. Rolander told you that she was told from Jason Rodriguez that Sharptooth was in the building. Now, it's the only person who told that to. He told other things to other doctors. But that he acted out of fear because he saw Sharptooth. Couldn't describe Sharptooth. Said he saw him, but couldn't give a physical description of what it was. And that he acted in fear. So let's play that out. Let's just say that that's true. And that was a delusion. And this person that you think exists, or figure, or humanoid, the word that she used, you think exists. You open the doors, there he is. You start to fire over and over again. If you've got a 40 caliber 9mm, you start to fire over and over again. And then you run the other way. Well, of course, that's not what Jason Rodriguez did. He didn't run the other way. He didn't fire 8 shots in the reception area. He didn't act as a person who was in fear. That is a fact. And then, of course, he developed a temporary amnesia. He can't remember that he wasn't in fear or what he saw. Ladies and gentlemen, the people at RSNH, the victims in this case, are not sheets of paper. They're not statements to be examined. They were people with lives who went to work on the morning of November 6th. They came in and they told you about the most horrific day in their lives. They gave you all the facts you need to find Jason Rodriguez guilty as charged of each and every count in this case. The state of Florida just simply asked you to rely on the facts. Law is a judge instruction. You find him guilty.
Members of the jury, do you need a slight break before we proceed to the defense's? Defense may proceed.
Thank you. May I proceed?
You may proceed.
Thank you, Counsel. You can't make sense of something that doesn't make sense. A person can behave rationally and still suffer delusions. You can have rational behavior in an irrational world. Living in a delusional world. His reality is not consistent with the real world. Acutely psychotic and delusional at the time. Lack of insight into mental illness. The reality is no imminent danger. But the delusion is always imminent danger. You all said in jury selection that you want parameters, and you'll follow the parameters that are given to you. So I want to talk to you about those parameters. You are going to get many instructions from the judge. And I ask you, please pay close attention to what he's reading to you. You're going to get one instruction that says, follow. An issue in this case is whether Jason S. Rodriguez was insane when the crime allegedly was committed. There are two ways in which a person can be found insane. The first is known as insanity. The second is known as insanity hallucinations. You're only to consider insanity hallucinations if you find the defendant sane under the insanity instruction below. So meaning, insanity is he had the mental infirmity, disease, or defect. The state conceded that in opening, paranoid schizophrenia. Every single doctor you heard, every single diagnosis confirmed, paranoid schizophrenia. The second part, because of his condition, he did not know what he was doing or its consequences, or, although he knew what he was doing and its consequences, he did not know it was wrong. Every single doctor did not know it was wrong. That's what they said. So, in order for you to even move to the second insanity instruction, you have to find that we did not meet our burden and insanity under this instruction was not met. We're not asking you to go to the second one. We're asking you to stop at the first and find it. We're going to get back to insanity in just a little bit. First of all, I'd like to talk to you about first-degree murder. Otis Beckford is dead. Yes. The death was caused by the criminal act of Jason Rodriguez. Up for debate with the insanity. There was a premeditated killing of Otis Beckford. I asked the medical examiner specifically, and I did this example. When he was shot, his back was facing the shooter. She said yes. I said, like this? You mean his back was facing the shooter? She said yes. There's no evidence that Mr. Rodriguez knew that that body, that being, was Otis Beckford. None. None. We didn't hear about any animosity towards Otis Beckford. No problems they had. No evidence they spent any significant time together. He didn't know. There's no premeditation to kill Otis Beckford because he didn't know who that was. He didn't know it was Otis Beckford. If the state's theory is true that he goes to the office looking for bosses, looking to kill bosses, Otis Beckford's not a boss. He has no control over unemployment checks, has nothing to do with any of that. Let's go on to the attempted murders. It's counts 2 through 6. The state has to prove that Jason Rodriguez did some act to intend to cause the death of those 5 people. Nobody's injuries were life-threatening. People were shot in the arm, in the ankle. One person was shot in the chest. The rest of the 5 survived. There's no evidence that he intended to kill those people. None. Two, he acted with premeditated design to kill. He didn't know these people. They didn't know him. Mr. Lugenbiel said that he knew Jason Rodriguez by sight, but had never worked with him. But if you look at the rest of the people, they don't know him. He doesn't know them. There's no intent to walk in and say, I'm going to shoot Ed Severino. He doesn't know it. There are people running in a hallway and there are bullets flying. The state wants you to believe that there is a particular mindset, a particular path that was followed because he was intending to do this, he took a path, and he meant to do it. When you look at the blueprints for RSNH, this part right here, these are the elevators outside of the office. This is not part of the office. This is the office, the U shape around it. So when you walk into reception, you can either go straight into a conference room or you can go into a hallway. And then you can either go straight up this way or straight up that way. There's nowhere else to go. The evidence shows that when he walks here, he starts shooting. People start exiting their offices, shooting. Just shooting randomly. Takes the path, goes back. Says that he's intentionally looking for managers. If somebody was going to be so angry that they were going to go kill managers, wouldn't you think they would take the time to stop and make sure the managers were there? Mr. Gonzalez hadn't even been working in that office for a while. He'd been working there. Jim Avitable wasn't there. Jesse Force wasn't there. So the state expects you to believe he is so angry that he's going to this office to take care of the problem. Take care of it. Kill the bosses. There's no bosses there. They're not there. So, deeper into the office, goes all the way back and around to somewhere around this area, which is where Rafael Velasquez was, which is one of the reasons he was going there was to confront him about the delusions and the zapping and the brain hacking. And then doubles back. And they want you to believe that with Mr. Glenn's office, that he tried to get in, which he did. That's not in debate. But they want you to think that's because he was trying to get in to kill Mr. Glenn. When the window was shot out, they're 4-foot windows. If you look at the pictures, you could easily step in to an office if the window's shut out. You could easily put a gun through the window and shoot whoever was behind the door. If he was intending to do that, that would have happened. You're talking about somebody who was a hunter, somebody who went to gun ranges to shoot recreationally. If he was intending to go shoot people under desks, he could have aimed and fired under a desk and shot more people. He didn't. If he was intending, if there were 20 bullets fired that day, 6 people got shot. Thank God it wasn't more. But 6. For an experienced marksman, 6 people get shot? It doesn't make sense. They're trying to make it into a premeditation, into a mindset, into something that was planned, that he decided to do. You can't make sense of it. You're also going to get an instruction on reasonable doubt. And reasonable doubt is a higher standard than clear and convincing evidence, which is the burden that we have to prove on insanity. So reasonable doubt means if you want to find Mr. Rodriguez guilty, you have to have no reasonable doubt. No doubt in your mind. that there was premeditation. This was all planned out, that he made a conscious decision to go in there, take the exact path that he did. When maybe that's the flow of the office. We only have two ways. He chose one, not the other. There's managers' offices on both sides, we heard, of that hallway. So, with reasonable doubt, if after carefully considering, comparing, and weighing all the evidence, there's not an abiding conviction of guilt, or if having conviction, it is one which is not stable, but one which wavers and vacillates, then the charge is not proved beyond every reasonable doubt, which is what they have to do. I want to talk to you a little bit about the parking garage. A big deal was made about the 6.5 minutes in the parking garage, where Ms. Ross comes in, the law professor, and says that he's staring at her. I submit to you, he's zoned out, as was described. He would sit and stare. We didn't look at their surveillance tapes, please, because he's not going up the back stairwell trying to get into the building the back way. He's not doing that. We learned from Officer Ring that in order to use the stairwell from the parking garage entrance to get into the building, that you had to have a swipe card to get in, which is why the police couldn't get in the 8th floor once they got there. There's no video of Mr. Rodriguez trying to go in a back covert way, trying to sneak up the back stairs and get in the office. None of that. I send it to you. He was disoriented. He went into the parking garage for 6.5 minutes, was kind of wandering around, found himself between the 5th and 6th floor ramp where he stopped and was zoned out when Miss Ross saw him. Realizes, I'm in the parking garage, I can't get in this way. Let me go to the front entrance. Let me check the directory. For somebody who worked in an office for almost a year, just shy of a year, he has to go check the directory to make sure he knows where it's at. You see the finger go like this, and then goes to the elevators. No attempt to disguise himself. No mask, no hat, no all black clothing. He's walking in. And he's not running in anger. He's walking. You'll see. Watch the video. He's walking at a normal pace. And if you watch it, not an angry look, just walking in. Looking. That is not evidence of premeditation. That's evidence of somebody who was confused, who was disoriented, who probably didn't realize where he was, which is why he probably spent 6.5 minutes in the parking garage, getting lost. And if he had never been to the building before, maybe that's normal. But that's not normal for somebody who worked there for almost a year. It's not normal. It doesn't make sense. Again, you can't make sense of something that doesn't make sense. One of the crime scene technicians said that they put the little tents up in the office where the shell casings were found. And they said, can you tell, though, where the shell casings were found, where the shots were fired at? No, sometimes if it bounces, rolls, we don't know. Nobody saw Mr. Rodriguez the entire time in the building. They're trying to piece together the path he took, where he paused, where he didn't, based on what people say. But It was chaos. It was total chaos in there. These people had gone through a traumatic experience and are trying to explain, stopped here, walked this way, then I think they stopped here, then I heard more shots. Is it possible they're confused, they're affected by the trauma? Yes. When people are hurt, Dr. Orlando told you about stress and traumatic events and what that does. Not saying what the people in the office building said was not true, their belief of what happened. But there's no cameras in the office, and not one person saw the entire thing. So the state can piece together the path he took and talk about bullets and, oh, pause here, pause there, but that's not necessarily accurate with what the actual evidence says. There's random bullets by a round conference table in the middle. There's random computer screens shot out. Random. Again, if he goes there to kill bosses, the bosses aren't there. There's no point. And if someone's going to go in and kill, we would expect somebody to wear a disguise, wear a mask, not where he's known. People know him. People can identify him. To just go in, start shooting, leave, not flee, go home, start cooking, eat something. It's not rational behavior. Now, if you look back at the separate people who were shot, Ed Severino walking down the hall, Mr. Hornbeck in the line of fire down a hallway, Ms. Harrison first shot stepping into a hallway, Mr. Lugenbiel shot as he's walking in a hallway. The only person who was shot in an actual office is Farrell Hickson, who doesn't even work there. This was not going manager office to manager office to manager office shooting. This is people in the hallway running, getting shot. This is random chaos. Now, the note that was left talks about, you have my stuff, I have the patent, weird things like that. So the state wants you to believe that that note is a telltale sign that he's going to come back and shoot up the place. 2 years later, why not a week? Why not a month? Why not a year? Over 2 years later, he gets mad one day and decides to go shoot up the office? It doesn't make sense. You can't make sense of something that doesn't make sense. On the performance reviews, we heard different testimony on that. Mr. Beverly says he didn't take it well when I would try to re-instruct him. He had an attitude. Mr. Gonzalez, though, said he was enthusiastic, he was polite, apologetic, and said he would try to do better, would shake hands. Not a problem. But then when he can't get back into the computer, which might have his secret papers that he was supposedly walking around with, or secret information on the computer, he gets mad. Excuse me, he says, fuck you to Mr. Van Velzen. He puts the note on the door. And then he leaves. There's no evidence after that that he had any contact with anybody from RSNH or that anyone from RSNH had contact with him. This is not a situation where someone is harassing or stalking or trying to follow these people or hunt them down or send them, nasty mail or call them and say horrible things or show up at their place of business and say something bad or threaten them. There's nothing. Nothing. So, if you go back to insanity, we have the conspiracy. RSNH, PBS&J, which is the Turnpike, who's contracted through Orange County, gang stalking, Rafael Velasquez, with Sharp Tooth in the middle driving it all. This is his reality. It is not the real world, and it's difficult to understand. This is real to him. So, let's talk about Rafael Velasquez. We heard from Mr. Gonzalez that Mr. Velasquez first worked for RSNH, then left and went to work for PBS&J, which is essentially the Turnpike, where he met Mr. Rodriguez. Then, Mr. Rodriguez tries to get a job with RSNH, and who helps him out? Rafael Velasquez. Rafael Velasquez calls Mr. Gonzalez a couple times, giving him recommendations, asking to try him out. He'll be fine. He does good work. Absolutely. So, Mr. Rodriguez goes to work for RSNH. Who then follows Mr. Rodriguez to RSNH? Rafael Velasquez, the person who helped him get the job there. I'm in no way saying that Mr. Velasquez intended to do any of this in part of a conspiracy. I'm not. This is his reality. This is what he believes. This. And the facts of Mr. Velasquez's employment history supports his delusion. We also heard that Mr. Velasquez is an amateur ham radio operator. And the theory as to how Mr. Rodriguez got zapped is working on the Turnpike. Mr. Velasquez had some radio equipment and recorded his audio and vocal frequencies. And that because of that, Sharp Tooth was able to broadcast to him through these frequencies. And this happened back in 2005. And how do we know that? The records from Greater Orlando Psychiatric, Dr. Pizarro was testifying, talk about delusions, hearing voices. She talks about the different medications he was on. Talks about his illness, his progress, when she saw him, when she didn't. How it progressed. How the medication, one point, didn't seem to be working, had to up the medication, had to add another medication. It's in here. You can look at this, the medical records. Dating back to 2004, 2007. So it's not like Mr. Rodriguez, before he even worked for RSNH, started making up mental illnesses so he could one day be excused for murder. not plausible. So the mental illness is real. How else do we know that? Well, there's physical evidence. You can't see too well with the projector, but if you take a look at this picture, when you go back there, you'll see right here the lining of the car is hanging down a little bit. When you go back to deliberate, if you take a look at number 25, which again you cannot see too well on this video, but right above this plaque is a hole in the wall where he was looking for listening devices. Devices that were listening to him, monitoring him all the time, his every move. There's physical evidence of this. It's not made up. It's not fabricated. Look at the evidence. There's also evidence cooking. Because Mr. Rodriguez said, I only was using the one pot. He must have gotten the other pot and was cooking. So we've got the cooking. This is physical evidence. It's here. Back to Mr. Gonzalez, you also heard from him that Mr. Rodriguez was missing a lot of work. He had offered him some medical leave time. He was having problems, having issues. You heard testimony that his state of mind was deteriorating. He was weird. He started carrying that bag with the secret documents in it. That's mental illness. All while using RSNH. That was testified to, not from his mom, from others who worked there, who saw it. Now, talk about having no insight into mental illness. Jump forward to when he's talking to the police. If you listen to the audio, he says, I worked there for 5 years, never missed a day. We know that's not correct. No insight. We heard about the Baker Acts. One of the officers came in and told you, been Baker Acted. 2007. Again, evidence. Isn't fabricated, isn't made up to say, oh, I think I'll go get Baker Acted so 2 years later I can use it as a defense for a murder. It's a fact. It is. The doctors all agree there is a long documented history of the mental illness. So, when you go back and you're considering the instructions, of insanity, did he have a mental infirmity, disease, or defect? Yes. That's been proven. By clear and convincing evidence. Yes. Absolutely. So then you go to the second prong, which is because of this mental infirmity, because of this condition, did he not knowing what he was doing or its consequences, or, although he knew what he was doing and its consequences, he did not know it was wrong? Every single doctor came in and said that he met the criteria for insanity because he did not know it was wrong. If we've proved that by clear and convincing evidence, then you should find him not guilty by reason of insanity. It's what the law is. Now, clear and convincing is evidence that is precise, explicit, lacking in confusion, and of such weight that it produces a firm belief without hesitation about the matter at issue. 6 doctors with over 100 years of experience, came in here and told you, number one, paranoid schizophrenia. Number two, he did not know what he was doing was wrong. They may have gotten it to different ways, took different paths to get there, but every single one came to the same conclusion. And there were variances about what they looked at and what they considered. But they all came to the same conclusion. If someone's sick, they go to a doctor. It's really serious, you get a second opinion. Is it opinion? Absolutely it is. But the jury instructions will tell you that an expert's opinion can be considered. And I would submit to you it should be in this case. The state wants to say it's sloppy work. They don't need to know all this other stuff to make their decision. They need to know what was going on in his head. That's what matters. That's what they said. I don't need to know if he was hanging out in the parking garage for 6.5 minutes. It doesn't matter. If he had said something inside the office, that would have mattered, but he didn't. The experts look at what matters. If somebody goes to a doctor complaining of an injury on their elbow, the doctor's not going to be looking at their ankle. They're going to look at the elbow. Same here. If we're asking the doctors to look at the time of the offense, now they have to go back through history to figure out what's going on. Is this a genuine mental illness? What's the behavior? Is it consistent? Is it not? That's why they go back. They explain that to you. And some of them had read the statements, and it didn't make a difference. It didn't make a difference in their opinion, because that's not what matters when you're talking about insanity. If it was, there would be a different instruction. The instruction is, because of his condition, he did not know it was wrong. Not what all the eyewitnesses thought, felt, saw. What did he know? In order to get other information, who's the next closest person who sees him every day? His mother. Did the airport thing confuse her? Sure. She said every time I got in the car with him, it was scary because he was driving erratically. Absolutely. When she got back from Puerto Rico, worst she's ever seen him. To the point where she was going to Baker Act him. And remember, she said the previous Baker Acts were because she thought he was going to harm himself. She had no idea, no thought in her mind ever that he would go out and hurt others. Now, the incident with the gun, the state wants you to believe that that's made up. Why? What's the point? He was bad off and she was going to call the Baker Act. Why make up a story about pointing a gun at her in the early morning hours? You know, pointing doesn't help anything, doesn't hurt anything. What it shows you is that if that's true, if he got up, she was going to the bathroom, he kind of startled, pointed a gun at her, and it took a minute. That shows you he's not thinking, he's not acting rationally, because he's going to point a gun at her. It seems as if when she had to call out to him and say, Jason, it's me and Mommy, it's as if she woke him up from the daze he was in, from the zone he was in. She said he was sweating, his eyes were bulging out. This was real to him, a real threat. And had he not stopped out of it, she might have been shot. Because he's in a different world. not in the same world that everybody else lives in. Now, ask yourselves about rational behaviors. Can you go to a school? Can you run an errand? Yes. People with paranoid schizophrenia, we heard, can function. You can have rational behaviors in an irrational world, in irrational situations. And you heard doctor after doctor say, you can have these rational behaviors going on, even though they're living in this delusion. So if somebody's planning on going back to school, it doesn't sound like they're planning on going to shoot up their old office building. That doesn't make sense. There's a clear history of odd behaviors. The driving, the holes in the apartment, the plugging of the ceiling, the headphones, which you heard from more than one doctor is a classic symptom of people with paranoid schizophrenia. The having the headphones on, even though you might have the radio or the TV blaring loudly and the headphones aren't plugged in. Classic. He was doing all of that. Did his mother come in and make it up just so this charge would go away? Dr. Pritchard said, I found her to be credible. Normally I don't rely on families, but I thought she was forthcoming. I thought she was telling me the truth. Zoned out, monotone, flat effect, hearing the voices, feeling threatened, gang stalked, conspiracy, giving her the Spanish name for sharp tooth, hiding, pushing people against walls because he thought somebody was going to be coming through the window or shooting through the window at them. Mr. Rodriguez's reality was that he was in danger. Now, well, if he's in danger, how can he go to a school? You can have rational behavior. How can he go to a post office? You can have rational behavior. It doesn't mean the delusions aren't true. It doesn't mean that the threat isn't real to him, not to everybody else in the world, but to him. Now, you also heard with the mom, and I believe Detective Ahern, talk about how she was going to call for support before she called to Baker Act him. Should she have called right away? Absolutely. But we can't go back and change that now. She did what she did that day. She was going to go to Albertsons, pick up some stuff, call for support, get him Baker Acted later that day. And that's what she told Detective Ahern. Let's talk a little bit about his statements. They left me to rot. They, the conspirators, left him to R-O-T, Turnpike. R-O-T. They left me to rot. Doesn't mean they didn't give me my check, screw them. I went in and shot them up because I couldn't get my unemployment check. That's not what it says. They left me to rot, which is very specific. This will all work out. I'm sorry. Surrenders peacefully. Doesn't have a shootout with police. Oh, yep, okay. Police are coming. I'll go with you. No problem with that. Gun laying out in plain view. Somebody is going in to shoot up a building. They are not walking around in plain sight, not running from the scene, walking. You see him walk in, you see him walk out. There's no running, there's no jogging, there's no ducking or hiding or trying to hide his face or what he's wearing or what he's doing. Walking. Doesn't flee the state, doesn't get in the Hyundai and drive to Texas. Doesn't. Goes home. Cooks. TV most likely on, is what we've heard. Can't remember exactly. Probably on the news stations because that's what the normal habit was. And sees all of this unfolding and says, oh my God, they're looking for me. They said I did this. I guess the police are coming. Does he run? No. Does he flee? No. Does he go anywhere? No. He leaves the gun on the dresser, not hiding it anywhere, gun on the dresser. And that's important because you don't use magazine clips to compare bullet casings. We heard that from the expert. He used the gun. So he's trying to hide the crime, hide evidence. He would have hid the gun because that's what gets tested against. Not magazines. Not vests. They use the gun. It doesn't make sense. When you look at this instruction, and I know I've talked about it, if you find we've proven this, you stop here. You don't need to go further. There's another instruction on insanity with hallucinations, which we submit. It's not what we're asking you to find. We're asking you to find this, to look at this. And remember what the doctor said. Do you need to know this, this, this? No, I don't need to know that to make my decision. And unfortunately, I'm not saying this is all about Mr. Rodriguez, but for the doctors and what they do, that's what's important. His mind at the time of the offense. What he was experiencing at the time of the offense. It doesn't belittle their experience or make it any less traumatic, but that's not what they do. And you heard how many hundreds of thousands of evaluations these people do. And the state expects you to believe that they're going to come in here and find Mr. Rodriguez insane on a big case with lots of charges, lots of serious charges, because that's what they do. They do it so much they just come in and find it. No, you heard Dr. Pritchard. This was a difficult decision. This was a complex case. You heard that from him. Going back out to get it right. If you've got more questions, you go follow up. That's what they did, because they wanted to make sure they got it right. And that their opinion was an educated, experienced opinion on insanity, which is what they gave you. Again, people can behave rationally and still suffer delusions. Perceptual reality is Sharptooth trying to destroy him. Lives in a delusional world. Understanding right and wrong when his reality is not consistent with the real world. May not realize how dysfunctional people are with schizophrenia. Acutely psychotic and delusional at the time. Acutely. That means very. It means serious. Reality is that there's no imminent danger. But in his mind, always imminent danger. ask you to look at all the evidence and use the parameters you're given. And if you do, you will clearly find that these two were proven by clear and convincing evidence. And we'd ask you to come back with a finding of not guilty by reason of insanity on all counts. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let's take a 15-minute recess to give everyone opportunity to refresh themselves. Again, please follow all of my previous instructions. Thank you.
Jury exiting.
Even for the alternates. Yeah. You may be seated. I made one correction to the last page, submitting case to the jury. I printed it out for you. It did not contain not guilty by reason of insanity. Yeah.
What? Hey, Ryan.
Here, folks, if you want to insert the new page.
Look.
The projector was on, but the camera was.